Hadith Thaqalain is known as the tradition of the two weighty things. It's the Prophet's final advice to the Ummah during his final farewell pilgrimage, where Muslims had gathered from all areas and localities. Narrations suggest that over 100,000 people were with the Prophet for this final pilgrimage. It's therefore no surprise that there are so many narrators of this tradition. The Prophet said, "I'm about to answer the call of death. I have left behind two precious things. Verily, they will not separate from each other until they come back to me by the side of the pond in heaven." The question is, what are these two weighty things? If we ignore the narrations found in Shia works of Hadith, there are two distinct versions found in the collections of the Ahl Sunnah. The first is found in Malik's Muwatta, where it's narrated that the Prophet said, "I'm leaving behind the Quran and my Sunnah," which means his habits or actions. The version in Sahih Muslim is different. In it, the Prophet says, "I'm leaving amongst you two weighty things. The one being the Book of Allah, in which there is guidance and light, so hold fast to the Book of Allah and adhere to it. The second are the members of my household. I remind you of your duties to the members of my household." There is no doubt this is a polemical discussion, but I want to make very clear, we approached numerous scholars from all schools of thought, particularly from the Ahl Sunnah. After all, we're discussing the traditions in Sunni books. We guaranteed that we would not edit any answers whatsoever. We even asked them to provide their own topics of discussion. We said, these are your hadith in your books. It's more fitting if you discuss and you explain them as you feel fit. We hope that more of our brothers from the Ahl Sunnah would join us when we discuss such issues. After all, what unites us far outweighs what disunites us. This is particularly apt in this day and age. Islam is under attack from all sides, even from within. We need to hold on to common grounds like never before, and that is ultimately what the following discussion is about. Hadith Thaqalain was the final advice the Prophet gave when the entire Ummah was with him. He said, hold on to these two things and you will never go astray. If we can find common ground with this hadith, there is no doubt we will be better for it.
Hadith Al Thaqalain, when we talk about it in this term, when you're talking about is it the family of the Prophet or is it the Sunnah, that's a particular controversial polemical context. Of course, Shia hadith, there's lots of material on the relationship between the Imam and the Quran. Ali is always with the Quran and the Quran is always with Ali, which is an early Shia hadith, but it's also found in Sunni sources, usually not in the Sihah, but it is certainly found. You have others where, for example, the Prophet addresses Amir al-Mu'mineen and says, just as I fought and defended the revelation, the Tanzil, so will you fight and defend the Ta'wil. And there's a big question about what's meant by the Ta'wil. So there's already this notion that after the Prophet, whoever succeeds the Prophet has to have a certain relationship with the Quran and has to defend its integrity. So in that sense, the Hadith Al Thaqalain encapsulates this notion of how we understand the revelation of God and how we understand the means by which we revert back to God. And what the Hadith Al Thaqalain is telling you is you go back to God through the Quran and through the Ahlul Bayt.
So in our sources, in the Sunni sources, for some reason Rasulullah uses two words, Itra and Ahlul Bayt, Itrati, Ahlul Bayti. Okay, so even in the same narration, one of the Sahaba said, what is his Ahlul Bayt or what is his Itra? Is it his wives? So then the second Sahabi is saying, no, how come? Because someone may divorce his wives and then he may just walk away. But Itra and Ahlul Bayt is his descendants.
So if you look at the term Ahlul Bayt in the Quran, for instance, chapter 33, verse 33, the preceding verses are addressing the wives of the Prophet. Now, the way we know that specific verse, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, إِنَّمَا يُرِيدُ اللَّهُ لِيُذْهِبَ عَنْكُمُ الرِّجْسَ أَهْلَ الْبَيْتِ وَيُطَهِّرَكُمْ تَطْهِيرًا. The way we know that includes males in that discussion is because of that pronoun at the end. Now, some have suggested that because that pronoun is used, then that excludes the wives of the Prophet, but in reality it does not. What it means is that it includes a number of males, at least one, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it excludes the wives of the Prophet. How we know the Ahlul Bayt refers to specifically those five, the Prophet, his daughter Fatima alayhi salam, Imam Ali alayhi salam, and Imams Hassan and Hussein alayhim salam, is because of the multiple narrations that we have, that the Prophet pointed towards them and he said, Ha'ula Ahlu Bayti, those are my Ahlul Bayt, specifically those.
In my own understanding, Rasulullah alayhi salam in here is referring to Imam Ali and to Imam Hassan and Imam Hussein. These are the three people, because all of them, they have received the tarbiyah from Rasulullah alayhi salam directly. Rasulullah alayhi salam gave them much more time to anyone else. So definitely, the most important thing that Rasulullah alayhi salam brought is Quran. So I don't doubt that these three people, especially Imam Ali, so he is the person who deserves the title of Sahib al-Quran after Rasulullah alayhi salam. Means the second most knowledgeable person about what is in Quran. And the third is Hassan and Hussein, because they were young. So they did not spend that much time as Imam Ali. So in my own understanding, Rasulullah alayhi salam was only referring to them. Definitely Sayyidah Fatima is there. Okay, so maybe just a bit lesser than Imam Ali or equal in terms of knowledge. So, and also the hadith which is transmitted within Ahl Sunnah sources, Hadith Al Kisai, if you remember. So in there, Rasulullah alayhi salam included some certain people. Who are these people? It was Sayyidah Fatima, Imam Ali, Imam Hassan, Imam Hussein, and himself. And then what did he say? Ya Allah, these are Ahlul Bayt. So purify them. So even Salama comes, no. You are doing well, but not one of us. Stay out. So I say this Itra, Thaqalain, is talking only about these people. And it is talking about source of guidance. As Quran is source of guidance, these people are also source of guidance.
The Shia traditionally have held that the version which they support of the Hadith Al Thaqalain, where it's the Kitab Allah wa Itrati or Ahl Bayti, is mutawatir and has 27 or 29 or 36 different chains of narration. In a sense, is not really important. What's important is what does that particular hadith mean for them, and what does it signify, and what does it prove for them. The same thing goes when Sunnis, who are perfectly aware that there are at least 27 chains, and they are perfectly aware that the hadith in its kind of Shi'i form, if you will, is found in Sahih Muslim, and it's found in Hakim's Mustadrak, and it's found in the Musnad of Ibn Hanbal and many other early texts. For them, it's the simple fact this hadith does not have that sort of import. It's not used to ascribe authority to any particular individuals, right? It's basically, it fits within this wider context of the Prophet saying good things about people around him.
Unfortunately, our Ahl Sunnah Mashayikh, they did not spend, you can say, enough amount of focus or energy on this hadith. They say this hadith is only emphasizing on looking after them, not as a source of guidance, but just looking after them.
For Sunnis, of course, there has to be a response to that, and the standard way in which you respond is you restrict meaning and you restrict the import. So what you do is you suggest that the hadith is not mutawatir, in the sense that it only has rare or singular chains of narration which are not corroborated massively. And the second thing is you dispute what it means. So you say that the Hadith Al Thaqalain does not mean that the Ahlul Bayt, in the restricted sense that we use it, refers to the authority that these people have alongside the Quran. Even if you consider the Quran to be greater or lesser, that's a different matter. But even if it's lesser to the Quran, they still have authority. That's something which has to be questioned, because of course that's not what happened historically in the early period. Then you also want to find other ways in which you can dilute that position by bringing in other people who might be covered by the category of itra or Ahlul Bayt.
If we take Imam Ali and Imam Hassan, Imam Hussein as source of guidance, as Quran is insisting, in that case, the politicians, they're going to lose big portion of their power, because Quran calls for the good treatment, equal rights, etc. Okay, but politicians need power. Okay, so that's why it maybe it is suggested by some of the scholars from the political, you can say, biases or agendas or backgrounds or whatever you can call them. Yeah. So it could be any of them too. Misunderstanding based on their assumption about their own principles, which is set up already about the guidance, or deliberate deformation in order to stay in charge.
The other thing which will happen is that, like a third possible strategy, is to say, well, even if we consider Hadith Al Thaqalain to be fadail or excellences or virtues of Ali, then of course others had virtues as well, and then they'll bring in these hadith about all my companions are like the stars, follow whichever one you wish. So again, there's a sense in which you dilute the meaning of the hadith by saying, well, there are lots of other hadith which talk about the excellences and the virtues and the authority of other individuals. And again, you would see that if you read that whole chapter in Sahih Muslim, where you have all these fadail. And then of course you have other medieval Sunni authors, people like Ibn Taymiyyah, etc., who will basically say that the fundamental problem is that all fadail literature is problematic. So they will say that the best thing to do is just to ignore all fadail literature, because there's so much of it and a lot of it is clearly fabricated.
Attempts to ignore or downplay the tradition are widespread. However, they come with their own inconsistencies. If we consider the idea that the hadith includes the wives and other relatives, then who would I follow in the Battle of Jamal, for example, where the wife of the Prophet is leading an army against Imam Ali, who was the Caliph at the time? Both sides are at war with thousands of Muslims killed in the battle. Is it conceivable that the Messenger of God commands us to hold on to the Quran and the Ahlul Bayt, and then members of the Ahlul Bayt are killing one another? I don't think that makes sense, to be honest. The argument that suggests that the hadith is commanding Muslims to look after the family of the Prophet, well, I suppose my question would be, why then was Fadak taken away from Sayyidah Fatima? Or why was her house threatened to be set on fire, with some historians convinced that that attack actually took place? Why was she so angry with the Muslims that she asked to be buried in secret? And even to this day, no one knows where she is buried. You also have the battles of Jamal, Siffin and Nahrawan, where Muslims waged war on Imam Ali, who was eventually killed by Ibn Muljam whilst leading the prayer. You have Imam al-Hassan poisoned, and then Imam al-Hussein, along with all the male members of the Prophet's family, killed at the Battle of Karbala in the year 61 AH. Clearly that interpretation of Hadith Thaqalain was ignored. But if we put history to one side, let's say the Prophet meant that we need to look after his family. How do I, in the 21st century, follow this advice? How do I look after the family today? They are no longer here. I clearly have my own biases, but it seems like there have been deliberate attempts to distort the true meaning of this hadith.
But what about, for example, Zayd al-Shahid, Musa al-Kadhim, Ali Sajjad, the most glorious Imams of Islam? They were gloriously knowledgeable. But are they included into this Thaqalain hadith? Jafari Mashayikh, according to their own understanding, they say yes. I say no, sorry. I love them. Our Imams, unbeatable Imams. For me, Ali Sajjad is 100 times better than my own Imam Abu Hanifa. Better in knowledge, in piety, in righteousness, in everything, as well as in the beauty, physical beauty also. So in all of the aspects of human being. But is he included into the Hadith of Thaqalain, which is talking about the guidance, source of guidance? Ali Sajjad is perfectly guided, but he's not included into this Hadith of Itra. Hadith is only talking about those Ahlul Kisa only. They will never be split up. So the people who are killing Ali, the people who are poisoning Hassan, the people who are killing Hussein, they were killing Quran. It's equal. So killing Quran, what it would worth? Exactly same, opposing Ali in any way, regardless. Or killing him, killing Hassan, killing Hussein. It's equal. Killing Quran, killing Ali, killing Hassan is equal. For me, it is equal. Because each of them are independently source of guidance.
The understanding highlighted by Sheikh Atabek is a growing opinion among certain sections of the Ahl Sunnah. Various scholars are now of the opinion that this tradition is referring to guidance in the family of the Prophet. However, this guidance is limited to the Ahl Kisa. So where do we get the authority for the Imams that followed the 5 that were under the cloak? Well, firstly, from a textual perspective, we see in Sahih Bukhari, Sahih Muslim, Musnad Ahmad bin Hanbal, Tirmidhi, Sunan ibn Dawood and various others that the Prophet said there will be 12 successors from the Quraysh after him. The question that follows is which 12? There has been confusion about this, especially during the time of the Imams. Firstly, there are numerous traditions where the Imam himself would designate who his successor would be. He would make it very clear amongst his family and companions who the next Imam would be. Secondly, there are no traditions where Imam al-Hussein says he is the last member of the Kisa and therefore the last pillar of guidance. In fact, history records him designating Imam al-Sajjad as his successor and commands his sisters to ensure he remains safe after the tragedy of Karbala. Again, history narrates that Sayyida Zainab stood in the way of Ibn Ziyad's men when they threatened to kill Imam Sajjad. Another argument to consider is the fact that there is no recorded inconsistencies when it comes to the 12 Imams of the Ahlul Bayt, where different rulings are provided by different Imams for the same scenario. Rather, there is a consistency found in their teachings. This is not the case with other individuals who claim to be the Imam. In fact, there are examples where such individuals were questioned but then failed to answer basic jurisprudential issues. This was never the case with the 12 Imams of the Ahlul Bayt. What's more, there are no examples of any other scholars superseding them in knowledge or any other excellence. Forget Shia historians, consider history written by other schools of thought. You won't find any examples where the Imams were corrected by anyone or were superseded in knowledge, or examples where they went to learn from other individuals. In fact, when we consider Imam al-Jawad and Imam al-Hadi, they became Imams at the age of 9 and 6. History from other schools of thought highlight how they surpassed the most senior scholars even at that tender age. It is therefore no surprise that each of the Imams were under significant supervision of the authorities, often imprisoned or under house arrest and then eventually killed. This in itself proves their status. Yes, other scholars were also pursued and killed, but in the case of the Ahlul Bayt, you have 10 generations killed one after the other. This fact alone is testament to the knowledge and character of these individuals. With that said, the discussion surrounding Malik's version of the hadith is arguably more apt when considering the formation of Islam as we know it today. The version found in the Muwatta states that the Prophet declared he is leaving behind the Quran and his Sunnah. This hadith has a single chain of narration and forms the identity of the Ahl Sunnah, the people or the followers of the Sunnah.
A hadith which are stated in the big audience but then narrated only by single chain. Is it accepted within Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah or not? So we have two opinions. First of all, we look into the subject. What is it talking about? So if it is subject which is important for everyone, which occurs to everyone, which is in our case, because matter of guidance. So in that we have two opinions. Okay, opinion of Malikis, Shafi'is, and Hanbalis, and the latest Hanafis, contemporary Hanafis. They say single chain narration is sufficient. But we have early Hanafi position, which I follow by myself. If the issue is something that occurs to everyone and everyone needs to know, which is guidance, the issue of guidance, for example, in that case, single chain narration is not accepted, but it actually proves the hadith to be weak.
Al-Muwatta is one of the earliest compilations of jurisprudence that we have in the Islamic tradition. The question is, well, why is his version a little bit different? Did he intentionally intend to sabotage the narration or to fabricate the narration? One thing that's important to understand is that even though most scholars were well versed in a variety of traditions, so when you came across a jurist such as Imam Malik, of course he's well versed in jurisprudence, in legal theory, but that doesn't necessarily mean that his ability to distinguish fully between what is authentic and what is non-authentic is not as fine-tuned as his other abilities. And even within the Ahlul Bayt school of thought, you had scholars who were very well versed in the areas of law and legal theory, but were not as well versed or fine-tuned in their area of, or in their study of narrations. And that's why you find, even within our own school of thought, that there are some traditions which are narrated by jurists which are questionable.
The significance of Malik's quotation of Quran and Sunnah fits within his wider, the wider context of what he's trying to do. So the fundamental thing about the Maliki school, and Malik's Muwatta in particular in the early period, is to establish authority as residing in the practice of the people of Medina, what's known as the Amal Ahl al-Medina, which is something that the Malikis were very keen on. And they directly associated Sunnah or Prophet with the practice of the people of Medina. So what in effect is being said when Malik quotes the hadith saying, cleave to the book of God and my Sunnah, in effect is basically saying, look, the authority of the practice of the people of Medina is normative. Right? So it then becomes almost like a foundational text to establish why the Muwatta is important. So something very, very different to when you find the hadith in its other forms in other texts. So the context of the Muwatta makes it very clear what's being said. It's fundamentally about the authority that Malik gives to this practice, this corroborated, continuous practice of the people of Medina.
The concept of Amal Ahl Medina, or practice of the people of Medina, seems like a very logical point at which to begin. The family of the Prophet, as well as his closest companions, all resided in Medina. So gathering your sources from there makes the most sense. You could even say that from that point of view, this version of Hadith Thaqalain sits in harmony with the version found in Sahih Muslim. However, when we begin to unpick the concept, there are suddenly a number of issues that come up. First and foremost, when we look at the Quran, we look at the chapters that were revealed in Medina, especially the ones towards the end of the Prophet's life. Chapters such as Surah Tawbah, chapter 9, where the vast majority of the discussion is referring to the hypocrites, people who claim to be the supporters of the Prophet, who turned out to be conspiring against him. The chapter talks about so-called followers who always made an excuse when the Prophet commanded anything, who even mocked some of the sincere companions. In the same way, consider chapter 63, the hypocrites, a whole chapter exposing so-called companions who didn't even believe in the Prophet, liars who would pretend to be Muslims, exposed by God in the Quran. These people also lived in Medina. So naturally, one has to wonder, to what extent did the concept of Amal Ahl Medina also take from these hypocrites? The other point to consider is why the version that speaks about Quran and Sunnah is not narrated in any of the 6 Sahih books. Surely such a critical hadith would have been cited.
That is a quite tough question, actually. That is a very tough question. First of all, we cannot question Sahih al-Bukhari, because Sahih Bukhari is left as draft copy. So Bukhari never finalized. So the copy that we have now, it is not the copy of what Bukhari was intending to make. Understand? Yeah, so it is out of context. Bukhari is out of context. But what about the rest? One of the reasons could be they did not have the authentic chain of this narration, or another could be in their understanding, the ones who did not narrate, in their understanding it was mistransmission of the Hadith Al Thaqalain. There could be more than one reason. But what was the actual reason? Well, they know, and God knows. Yeah.
This is a loaded question. Do you think they could have been influenced politically?
Anything is possible. Okay, anything is possible, because human, regardless whatever his status, so we all get influenced. Okay, so for example, right now you are wearing certain clothes. Why? Because you are influenced. Understand? So influence is there. Okay, and some of the influences could be permissible and some are not permissible. But how do we know? Well, God knows that.
So,
yeah, especially for example, Imam Nasai, he is very well known. Okay, so he has been killed. Why? Because of the matter of Ahl Bayt and Muawiyah. So he treated Muawiyah in very low level. Okay, so because he had tashayyu', if you know the meaning of tashayyu' Sunni. Okay, so tashayyu' Sunni, in which not insulting Abu Bakr and Umar, but keeping Ali above them. So that is tashayyu' Sunni. So they killed him because of that. Okay, so if you remember, he came to Sham, to Syria, and in the main Jami' of Damascus, he started narrating the hadith. They asked him, because Sham, you know the meaning of Sham then, okay, Umayyads, center of Umayyads, to narrate the ahadith in the Fadail of Muawiyah. So he became very angry and he said, I don't know any hadith in the virtue of Muawiyah except that Rasulullah says, may Allah not fill his belly. That type of... So then the people, the muhaddithin in Sham, they became very... Then they started kicking, beating. So he was bleeding and then he had to go run away physically out of Damascus, and in one of the ruins of the ancient city there, he just died there. He was bleeding and he just died there. Okay, so, and his collection is one of the 6 books, Sunan. So I don't think that this person with this courage would be influenced out of fear by political, you can say, mentality. Definitely, I'm not saying that he will not be influenced by, and he will be influenced by something, but not because of fear. Look how he died, as a courageous person. Okay, insulting Muawiyah in the center of Umayyads place. So I don't think what you are saying could be applicable on him. Okay, so means it could be anything. It could be anything.
We have to understand that throughout history there was also a deliberate attempt to specifically divert attention away from the Ahlul Bayt to other figures and other personalities. Whatever the reasons may be for that, some of it was political. Actually, a lot of it was political. And scholars were, for the most part, under the influence of politics and politicians. And so what they chose to narrate, the wording that they chose to narrate, sometimes was based off of that influence and the interests that they had to serve.
We can't say for sure why certain traditions were included and others weren't. It's easy to say that there was an agenda, but proving it is impossible. But then maybe proving it is not important. Rather, what is important for all Muslims is understanding why the Ahl Sunnah have taken the version in Malik's Muwatta so centrally. Like I said, the name Sunni or Ahl Sunnah comes from this tradition, the people who follow the Sunnah.
So the importance of the Sunnah, the most popular or the most common school in our time, the school of Ahl Sunnah, it is Hanbali school. For them, Hadith and Sunnah is predominant. It is above Quran, it is above anything. Okay, so even they quote from Awza'i, in which they say, Awza'i says, for me it is quite dangerous statement, but they narrate it from Awza'i, and you know the Awza'i, like a Mujtahid of Sham, etc. So Awza'i says that Sunnah is superior above Quran, because Sunnah can judge upon Quran and Quran cannot judge upon Sunnah. So Sunnah can specify what is general in Quran, but Quran cannot specify, limit what is general in Sunnah. Do you understand? So that is, you can say, common principles of Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah in our time. So for example, did you ever have a discussion with Sunni brothers? So what do you think when they ask for evidence? What do they expect from you? Hadith. Okay. And if you give them some opinion, they ask you, do you have hadith to back it up? Even we have this non-hadithi school called Hanafi. The latest ones and contemporary Hanafis are also hadithis. You can say Hanbali mentality. So they say Quran only with hadith. That is only the guidance. But if you ask them, what about Quran on its own? They say no. But what about if it's hadith on its own? Verbally they may say no, but practically they say yes. Because they already confirmed that hadith is dominant. And hadith can specify Quran, hadith can abrogate Quran, hadith can do as-sunnatu hakima wal Quranu mahkum. That is the principle. Awza'i explicitly confirms that. So it means Sunnah independently is guidance, but Quran is not a guidance independently. Okay, so that is the contemporary, you can say, Sunni mentality.
You could argue that in a Sunni context, what you want to say is that, of course, the reversion back to God goes through the Quran and through the Sunnah, but of course the Sunnah then, of course, is understood with all these other accretions to it. So the Sunnah is not just about the Prophet, the Sunnah is about the early community as a whole, it's about that ijma', it's about a particular order of caliphs, it's about the normative practice and authority of those caliphs and so forth as well. So in some ways the term Ahlul Bayt is much more transparent by what it means, but Sunnah is not transparent in terms of what it means. With Salafis, in some ways it's very clear what they mean by Sunnah. They mean the practice of the early generations, particularly the first 2 centuries, right? But that also gives them flexibility because there's a massive variety of those practices. So even if you just looked at the people who would described as companions of the Prophet, you'll get everything from justification for nepotism to hoarding wealth to being a very staunch socialist, or someone who rejects private property and so forth. So you've got lots of possibilities of what you can do with it. And that's why, in a sense, this appeal to Quran and Sunnah is pretty vague. It gives you actually much more flexibility than people think.
100%. We are not following what was left behind. I had a chance of looking into some of the works of our Jafari Mashayikh and a lot of the works of Ahlul Sunnah. No, what is being practiced now, it's not what was left behind. There was no any collection of hadith. So then how Prophet can say that I'm leaving something which he never did? Look, I'm talking from my own point of view. Rasulullah alayhi salam, messenger, is nothing but the one who gives interpretation to Quran. And interpretation is not all the time verbal, but by practice also. So I'm living Sunnah in Arabic language means my way of being, my path, my habits. So what Rasulullah ﷺ used to do and say, it is just interpretation of what we should, how we should act upon Quran. And that was left behind, definitely. But did they transmit it as correctly or not? That is a different question. Because as soon as Rasulullah ﷺ died, okay, when these Bani Umayyah came, so they have ordered their own scholar to rewrite the Sunnah under the name of Sirah, Maghazi. Definitely, I'm quite confident that there will be a lot of deformations, a lot of hiding the facts, a lot of, you can say, things, but yet there will be some drops of light also, if you understand what I mean. So was there something left behind? Of course, Rasulullah living with them for 23 years or 25 years, so he was demonstrating his Sunnah. Sunnah means habits. Okay, Quran is revealed about forgiveness. So look, learn from me how you should be forgiving. And by his practice, he demonstrates forgiveness and mercy, for example. Understand? So did he leave something behind? Definitely he left. Okay, but was it written or not? There maybe we can disagree. As the scholars in the time of Sahaba disagreed, or even in the time of Rasulullah. Okay, Abu Bakr, he was against writing any hadith. Even in Mustadrak of Hakim says, okay, in one of his books, I think it is in Madkhal, if I'm not mistaken, he was told that Sahaba, they have got some manuscripts with the collections of ahadith. So he collected them all. He told them all to bring. And in total it was something about 500. And then he spent whole night thinking about it. And then he burned. Next day he said, I thought about it and then I came to conclusion that I have to burn it. And then he did burn it. Okay, so that was this means Abu Bakr did not agree that we have to transmit it as written. But was it transmitted in written? Well, I say yes. Based on this, yes. Okay, and Imam Ali had perfect knowledge of all of that. There wasn't any dot in Quran which he did not know. Maybe some of the other Sahaba, maybe there were passages. Abu Bakr, for example, فَاكِهَةً وَأَبَّا. Okay, in the Mimbar, he says, I don't know what is Abba. Understand? So it means some of the Sahaba did not know some of the verses. But what about Ali? No. He spent enough time to learn each single dot in Quran. Okay? So that's why Rasulullah was emphasizing. So during my lifetime, you took from me, but now I'm leaving him and his children. They spent long enough time to learn from me what is revealed in Quran. So they will never get separated from Quran. They will have perfect understanding of Quran all the time. So carry on learning from them. So that was the meaning of that hadith.
One of the old myths was that the concept and authority of the Sunnah is established by Shafi'i. That's not true, because the recourse to the idea of the Sunnah is found in very early texts, and we have examples of that. And there it's understood as one Sunnah amongst many other Sunnahs. Perhaps what Shafi'i does is he delimits what is meant by that. So the classic definitions that you find in Sunni context of the Sunnah, being what the Prophet said, what the Prophet did, what he acknowledged in his presence and so forth. And what authority that has with respect to the Quran, with respect to theological positions, etc. You find that being articulated in the Risala of Shafi'i. And that's quite important because already in that you have the beginnings of an expansion of this sense. Because by then saying what the Prophet acquiesced, you're in effect giving authority to the companions of the Prophet, regardless of whether there is something specific. So that's why you then get hadith texts which include direct statements or rulings or ahkam or whatever of companions alongside the actual statements of the Prophet. And you find that from the earliest collections of hadith, the so-called Musannaf works, which are about a century or so before Bukhari and Muslim, in Abdul Razak, in Abu Shayba, Ibn Abi Shayba, and a number of other Musannaf works which were established before that. You already have plenty of companion material alongside what the actual sayings or the deeds of the Prophet are. So you have the development from that, and then by the time you get to the classical period, when the hadith compilations are produced, when the earlier theological texts, systematic theological texts, works of creed and so forth are established, then it's very clear by that point that the Sunnah of the Prophet means much more than literally just what the Prophet said and did. It's about his whole milieu and how that sunnah then is then transmitted. For the Malikis, it's very easy. The transmission of the sunnah is through what the people of Medina do. So already the sunnah is much more than what the Prophet did and said, right? What they would say is that you can discern the sunnah from what these people do, regardless of whether you have a text which goes back to the Prophet. And you find that happening in the Muwatta. There's many things which are reported in the Muwatta which do not go back to the Prophet. But that's because you have this kind of hermeneutical device, if you want, of referring to the Amal Ahl al-Madinah. But for the others, of course, you have this wider sense of where the community comes in, where the normative practice of the caliphs and the companions and then the successors and so forth comes in. And so then you have this expansion of a sense of what Sunnah means. And in that sense, it's sometimes a bit odd for Sunni theologians to object to the Shia understanding of authority, because the Shia could say, well, all we're doing is we're expanding the authority of the Sunnah of the Prophet to that of his direct successors, the Imams who are of his family. So we're just doing that. We're doing something which is very similar. If anything, we're not extending it as much as you are by bringing all sorts of other people into it.
If the Shia are criticized for saying they belong to the Ja'fari school of thought, the school that was set up by Imam al-Baqir and later formalized by Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq, because these Imams were not there at the time of the Prophet, well then it must be proven that their teachings are contrary to the practices of the Prophet. Even one example. The same, however, cannot be said about other schools of thought who take their practices from companions who openly did things differently to the Prophet. Things that were halal at the time of the Prophet were made haram after he passed away, or additions to the Fajr Adhan, or the Taraweeh prayers being described as a good innovation. And there are various other such examples.
What you accept when you accept the Sunnah of the Prophet, the Sunnah as such, is you're accepting much more than the Prophet. And that's made very clear in the famous controversies about after the death of Omar, the 6-man committee and what they offered the two candidates. And of course, Amir al-Mu'mineen famously says, I'm not going to agree to acting upon the Sunnah of the Shaykhain, because if they did anything according to what the Prophet did, well then it's already covered by the Sunnah of the Prophet, and if they didn't, then I can't do it because it's not binding upon me. Right? And ultimately that's where it comes back to. It comes back to this issue of does the Sunnah include the binding authority of those people? And actually Sunnis will say, well, the Sunnah also includes what Ali did, but it includes what he does alongside many others. That's the problem. And it seems that the earliest usage was directly associated with the Prophet, but fairly quickly after that it starts taking on all these other aspects of what those around him and the next generation are doing and so forth. And that's, as I said, that becomes very problematic, because then you can justify all sorts of things. You suddenly get all the worst excesses of the early conquests. And there's so many other problems with it. Because once you then include the Umayyads into this sort of chain of authorities who bear the Sunnah after the early period, and it's very difficult to deny that is not the normative Sunni position. It certainly is the normative Sunni position that Muawiyah and Yazid and all those guys were legitimate caliphs. That's why you then get this kind of slippery slope to the sorts of violence and justification of violence that you find in the present.
Listen, we need to be very clear. We're not saying that the Ahl Sunnah, who make up over 1 billion people, agree with or support the actions of any violent groups. Not at all. These groups have been set up by foreign powers as proxies to work against Islam. What we are saying is that these proxies have utilized the actions of some of the early Muslims as justification for their own actions. What we need to do is be honest and admit that if the Sunnah is going to include the actions of anyone other than the Prophet himself, then we suddenly have contradictions that can be exploited, regardless how senior these personalities were. As Muslims from all schools of thought, we should be adamant that the Sunnah should only be the actions and behavior of the Prophet. Many things were done in the name of Islam or the Caliphate that the Prophet did not do. We need to differentiate his actions and the actions of others. If we can unite on his actions, then we will be much better for it.
The expansion of the concept of the Sunnah only makes sense if you have certain assumptions. One certain assumption is what's known as Adalat al-Sahaba, right? So the idea that all the companions have integrity and probity, and they are kind of unimpeachable, so to speak, in their actions and their words and so forth. And the second one is about this kind of notion of consensus of the community.
Now, recently, it's becoming very popular that Ahl Sunnah scholars, they're looking into this hadith of Malik and saying that it is mistransmission of the hadith of Thaqalain. It was not sunnati, but it was itrati. Some of the narrators, he mistransmitted. We don't know the reason, maybe deliberately, maybe by mistake, maybe while copying, understand? So it could be anything, but so that is becoming more, you can say, popular within Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, and the reason could be many. Okay, one of the reasons, in my own understanding, which is beautiful, before we were very isolated to ourselves. Hanafis with themselves, Hanbalis with themselves, Ja'faris with themselves, but now we have social media, lectures all over the places, articles, okay? So people started looking, okay? So slowly people are adjusting their understanding. Scholars are not exemption, okay? So in my own understanding, the main reason is this, okay? Main reason is that we started looking into each other's tradition. All of that is influencing. Okay, so Ahl Sunnah get influenced from Ja'faris, Ja'faris get influenced from Ahl, because they're opening another, suggesting something new to contemplate about. Okay, so that could be the reason. Okay, one of the most direct reasons in my understanding. But there is another reason, which is people started thinking also. Okay, so for example, I do by myself, I teach the science of hadith. So my students started thinking. Okay, so the hadith which is concerning the guidance, and only one person is narrating, whereas hadith is related to the guidance and it is mass transmitted, and both of the hadiths are talking about the same very issue. What is the source of guidance?
The people who do kind of try to approach this in different ways, they get shut down very quickly. So, you know, you've got some very important Arab intellectuals who've like said, no, look, come on, look, this early period is very problematic for us. Look at someone like, Hassan Farhan Malki in Saudi. I mean, he's a very, very interesting person. He's not, of course, Wahhabi. Sometimes it seems that his positions are much more Zaydi positions, but he raises all sorts of very important questions. He raises the thing that, why do we not, if we claim that we're Sunni, why do we not take the Ahlul Bayt more seriously than we should? And at one point this led to him being under house arrest, and that happens with other people as well. It was one of the most painful things, most painful experiences for me as Sunni to admit that we did not only betray Quran, but also we very badly humiliated the second source also, Ahl al-Kisa, Itra of Rasulullah alayhi salatu wassalam. We killed the main source, Ali, and we killed the two other branches of Ali in really bad way. Sayyidah Fatima, even long before Imam Ali, was also killed. Okay, so anyway, killed or died according to different narrations. Okay, so even though I have my own understanding of the... So, I have really badly struggled. Okay, because till today, when I open Quran, if I want to prepare some lecture about one verse, believe me, I spent hours and hours and hours. The other day, I prepared a lecture about Yajuj
Ma'juj, mentioned twice in Quran. Believe me, I spent about 9 hours. I go to Tabari, I go to Qurtubi, all of them are top scholars. Okay, great, Tabari, you know that amazing scholars, but so contradicting each other. Understand? So what I'm saying is, if we would listen to what Rasulullah said, we would summarize all of that 10 hours into 2 minutes. Ali would give the actual thing without giving us all of the opinions. Who is it? Dhul-Qarnayn? Yeah, Alexander the Great, or Dara, or Cyrus. Interpretation, some say no one knows. Understand? And then you have to dig into it. So if no one knows, why to mention this story? Understand? So Ali would just, by a couple of words, he would just satisfy everyone, you know. Okay? But unfortunately, it's gone. We killed him. But where is the heritage? So the ones who came after him, all of the hypocrites, destroyed that heritage also. Burned the books, okay? Fabricated these munajat, saying that is the knowledge of Ali. Ali was not that crying Romeo, you know. Ya Allah. He was greatest abid, but his knowledge was not munajat. His knowledge was herbalism. His knowledge was science. His knowledge, all, whatever is mentioned in Quran. Okay? Now, if you ask any scholar, I'm not sure about our Jafari Mashayikh, but our Ahl Sunnah Mashayikh, what is the purpose of life? They say, yeah, so you can worship. Finish. That's incorrect. Understand? You will not get any proper answer, because interpretation of Quran was killed by us, by our hands. We killed him in Kufa. Okay? So now, advice for myself and for my friends, how we can get I'm a bit, I hope, I have a lot of hopes, dreams, wishes, but I'm afraid that the reality is quite painful, you know. I struggle to find the opinions of Imam Ali, authentic opinions, because all of the genuine students of Ali, they have been labeled as heretics, just to cut the source of knowledge of Ali, you know. So whenever some scholar is labeled as heretic, his books will be burnt. So we do not have anything which connects us back to the knowledge of this glorious personality, Imam Ali. Okay? His sons, really badly humiliated, killed in the most miserable way. You do not wish it to your enemy either. Okay? So where is their knowledge? Again, burnt, destroyed. Understand? So that's why I came to conclusion, I, by myself as Hanafi, came to conclusion that now I have only Quran in my hand. I have intellect. And I try my best. Whenever anyone says to me, we have narration from Ali, I go, I make sure, and I compare it. But I do not take it straight away, because there is a lot of fabrications. Because people wanted to make him to look very evil, very stupid guy, you know. Some of the narrations are, you know, such horrible about his opinions. I do not accept it. I say Imam Ali will never make this type of silly mistakes, because Rasulullah promised that he will never be going splitting from Quran. Okay, so now what to do? My own, you can say, principle for myself is, so Quran, okay, and intellect, and anything helps me. It could be history, it could be poetry, it could be anything. Okay, because I assume that we lost that glorious knowledge, which is coming from any of them 4 sources of guidance. Say that Fatima, Imam Ali, Imam Hassan, Imam Hussein. We lost it, it's gone. As previous nations lost their authentic copies of their gospel, that's how we lost the authentic, you can say, opinions of any of them 4 sources of guidance. So that's why just I struggle. I just use my intellect. Main source is Quran, Hadith, opinions of the scholars. I involve all of them, but I filter it by these 2 main things, Quran and my brain. So that's why I think it is. It should make us just to step back. We may have very, you can say, active, very sharp brothers from Ahl Sunnah or from Jafari, you can say, traditions, So I think after assuming that we lost the original opinions, so we should not be as strong as we supposed to be if we would have Ali with us now, defending and spreading his knowledge. But because the opinion of Imam Ali, which you are grabbing on now, it could be fabricated also. So that's why I think it is time for us just to help out each other to find the guidance. I'm as Hanafi, I need your advice if you find my error, okay, as well as Hanbali, Salafi or Shafi'i brothers. So I need their advice also. So I think now it is not that time in which we have to be very strong, but more appealing to each other, because we need each other in our time, in our century, more than in any other time.